Hi everyone, let's do Tano here, the internet's busiest music nerd, and it's time for a review of the new First Aid Kit album, Ruins. This is the fourth full-length album from Swedish folk pop duo First Aid Kit, who I first stumbled upon in 2012, like most people did, through their breakout album Lion's Roar. The record wasn't one of my favorites of the year, but I did walk away from it pretty impressed. Impressed by the sisters' tight vocal harmonies, rustic instrumentation, dramatic songwriting style, and it was sad to see some of that kind of evaporate on their follow-up album Stay Gold a few years later, which was a slightly more measured and glitzy release by comparison. While the instrumentation did seem bigger than ever, totally soaked in reverb, there was something kind of sterile about this record in my opinion. The presentation of the music seemed like a little more mainstream and kind of watered down. First Aid Kit's sound wasn't nearly as cheap and as groovy and as melodramatic as like a band such as the Lumineers, but there was definitely something about this record that kind of made me lose touch with the emotional connection that I had with their previous work, despite the sisters' very unique vocal chemistry. Fortunately, Ruins takes things in a bit more organic direction, with a new flood of sound and instrumentation. This thing is not simply a folk record. I mean, there's a lot of electric instrumentation on this thing. The sisters are now dabbling in elements of country and Americana on quite a few tracks of this thing, kind of pulling from the back catalogs of artists like Lucinda Williams and Emmylou Harris. The duo's core songwriting characteristics haven't really changed all that much though. Quite a few songs on this thing still feature their cheek-to-cheek harmonies that typically reach into their upper registers, soaring over swelling folk instrumentation on the chorus, an effect that is enhanced by the extra layers of guitar and percussion and strings on a lot of these tracks. Case in point, the song It's a Shame. Great, galloping, epic folk pop tune. And there are moments on this record where they're kind of breaking away a little bit from the incessant vocal harmonies to deliver some singing that is a little bit more stark and raw and intimate. The song Postcard is an example, plus on this track there is a little bit of what sounds like pedal steel or some very nice sweet slide guitar, a bit of a backwater groove too. Easily one of the rootsiest songs the duo has ever put together. And the song Fireworks is this really sweet ballad in 3 that has a very humble, simple introduction, and the song gets more and more lush and dense and layered as it progresses, and it just kind of hits this really epic finish against some dancing strings and a swinging drum beat. But even though I like that the sisters are changing things up, sometimes their approaches to the genres outside the folk world can be a little basic, like on the song To Live a Life, which is not really one of the most entertaining tracks on the track listing here. Plus, when we're looking at the lyrics, sometimes I get the sense that whiskey and wine and driving on the interstate is about as Americana as these two Swedes get. So truth be told, there are some moments on this record where First Aid Kit doesn't really have quite as much bite as they did on their earlier material, quite as much urgency. There are moments on this thing that go a little middle of the road and predictable. The slightly new direction this album goes in doesn't drum up quite as many surprises as I had hoped for, and depending on who you talk to, First Aid Kit's unwavering dedication to this harmonized vocal style on every record thus far could either sound like them just sticking to their guns or painting themselves into a corner. However, I would argue that this album on the whole and its best tracks, their appeal doesn't really come down to their risk factor, but rather their warm, welcoming, comfortable, familiar, and enchanting vibe. And for the most part, the grander, louder, larger, more refined folk Americana country instrumentation on this thing enhances that. I mean, there are some spots on this thing where the duo's music almost becomes as epic as like a Fleet Foxes song. Occasionally, the gargantuan size of these tracks kind of gets away from the duo or doesn't come off quite as spectacular as I think they had hoped. Like the chorus of drunken horns and la la la's at the end of Hem of Her Dress just comes off like really ham-fisted to me. Kind of reminds me of some of the worst and most gimmicky days of the indie folk revolution of the 2000s. You know, like some really annoying Edward Sharpe and the Magnetic Zeros type stuff. And for all of its volume and noise, the final moments of the closing track on this thing just came off a little too measured. I mean, I like that they try to bring things to a distorted crescendo so that it's really an explosive ending, but the pacing up until that point is just way too measured to feel like you're progressing toward anything that's really as freewheeling and really as wild as I think they want you to feel it is with the volume. All that being said though, a great deal of the tracks on this album are good and well written and well performed and well recorded and produced. I'm just a little hung up over the fact that I feel like some of the shortcomings of this album just keep it just ever so slightly back from being the great album it had the potential to be. Because I do think that Ruins was really close to being the duo's best record. However, I feel it's fallen a bit short. Still though, this thing is packed with rich folk instrumentation, tried and true chord progressions, obviously the vocal performances are good, and I'm sure most listeners looking for some very direct and to the point folk pop are going to enjoy this thing nearly from front to back. I'm feeling a light to decent 7 on this thing. Transition. Have you given this album a listen? Did you love it? Did you hate it? What would you rate it? You're the best, you're the best. What should I review next? Hit the like if you like. Please subscribe and please don't cry. Just, leave a thoughtful comment in the comments if you're feeling thoughtful. All right, you're the best. Over here next to my head is another first aid kit review you can check out. Click on that or the link to subscribe to the channel. Anthony Fantano, First Aid Kit, forever.